right. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. My name is Jason Roba, and I'm here with Thomas Sheridan for episode 18 of The Week in Strange. Today, Timoney is not able to join us. Her son, Escher, is not feeling well, so she's taking care of him today. But Thomas, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you, Jason. We're having some nice weather here after some pretty cold weather, having a little bit of an Indian summer, so I'm enjoying that.
Awesome. Yeah, those Indian summers are always nice. We need one around here too. It's been pretty chilly lately, and it'd be nice to have a little bit of warm weather. I've turned into a little bit of a little bitch with the cold weather here since I moved to the east side of Washington. But yeah, it'd be well worth having some warm weather. And thanks to everyone yesterday here on Facebook who turned out for the virtual pub. That was real nice of everyone. And in other news, today we set up a Patreon account for Beyond Room 313 to help out with the filmmaking here on this side of the pond, on the U.S. side of things. So anybody I know we've already got a couple people subscribed so far. So thank you to all of you who subscribed to our Patreon, that is. Any little bit of money helps. If you got $5 or $10, $20 to contribute each month, it'll help pay for these films that we've been doing, to help pay for cameras, travel expenses, footage, whatever it takes to get these produced. So thank you to everyone who's been doing that. And so let's go ahead and kick off today. So we've got a couple stories here to read to you guys. This first one, the title is Stanton Friedman was approached to potentially develop secret UFO technology. This is from the 18th of October of this year. A personal letter sent to the late Stanton Friedman in 2010 divulging the testimony of a witness to the recovery of debris and bodies, along with the subsequent attempts to back engineer the technology recovered from a flying saucer that crashed in New Mexico in 1947, has come to light. Obtained at the request of the website Mystery Planet. The letter was part of a larger volume of documents that has been collected over the years by Friedman. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to put that image up on screen of part of this letter. So can you all see that? Oh, there we go. There it is. All right. The letter was part of a larger volume of documents that had been collected over the years by Friedman. The letter details one individual's participation in the recovery efforts of the crashed saucer, which he saw during the event, and what later he learned regarding the secret attempts to reverse engineer the technologies hidden in the craft. The sender closes the letter, extending an invitation to Friedman to help him develop the exotic technologies unveiled in the classified documents that the witnesses, a trusted family member, gave to him. The letter sent to Friedman by an individual identified only as Sean from Gatesville, Texas, in January 2010, outlines how in 1973, Sean's father, an aircrew member stationed at Fort Worth in 1947, told him about the involvement in recovery of a crashed UFO debris from a quote-unquote remote piece of land in New Mexico, identified only as my father, quote-unquote, throughout the letter. The individual was asked to examine the debris, having had experience with the mechanics of jet aircraft, and determined that the vehicle was neither American nor Russian. He also told Sean that he had a chance to examine the bodies and said that they were, quote unquote, not from this planet. Sean goes on to say that his father became deeply involved in learning about back engineering efforts involved in recovering non-human craft, and would come to learn that the bodies of the entities recovered from the craft were actually artificially produced, and that the provided craft's propulsion through an advanced form of telekinesis that enabled the craft to travel between 2 points in the universe instantaneously, across dimensions, and possibly through time. Before he died, Sean's father gave his son a set of classified documents from a project codenamed RAMP, an apparently successful effort to back engineer the propulsion technology of the craft. At the end of the letter, Sean invites Friedman to help him develop the technologies outlawed in the RAMP documents. Friedman read the letter, evidenced by the notes written by him at the top of the typed document, although it is unknown as to whether or not he responded to Sean's request for assistance in putting the information to some sort of use. As a nuclear physicist, Friedman was probably well qualified to make sense of whatever data might have been contained in the RAMP documents, although those files, provided they exist, have not been uncovered. It should be noted that at no point does Sean claim that his father was the witness to the famous Roswell crash in Lincoln County. Indeed, the word Roswell does not appear at all in the document, but that is, his father was sent to a quote unquote remote piece of land after landing at an airbase in New Mexico in early July 47. A number of UFO crash/retrieval events are alleged to have taken place in the New Mexico around this time. So the witnesses may have been involved in one of the lesser known attempts to recover alien technology. The following letter is a text of the letter itself, which is a bit of a long read. The description of the craft and its occupants, whether they are true or not, are fascinating. So the linked story will have a text file that goes along with this, but I know that we aren't necessarily a fan of the nuts and bolts UFO phenomena here in Beyond Room 313, but this is an interesting story nonetheless. The idea that it talks about using some sort of technology to jump from one point in space and or time to another. So Thomas, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this one.
Well, to concur what you said about the nuts and bolts element, it's just a letter. It doesn't prove anything. It could be Friedman himself could have typed that up. It could be from anyone. It could be someone winding Friedman up. We don't know. I've often been very suspicious of my life. I've known him of Stanton Friedman. Lots of reasons. John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecy, referred to people who are obsessed with one explanation, space aliens, as being cultists. They were completely cult-like. You could not get any other idea into their heads. It was space aliens, and that was the end of it. And so those kinds of people, Friedman was like the Pope of them. He constantly kept it on that path. He validated that. He was the one who kept the Roswell nonsense going much longer than it's ever needed to go on. I firmly believe that the Roswell thing was a Cold War psyop to offset terrors amongst Americans concerning the detonation of a hydrogen bomb by the Soviet Union, having them believe that Americans had spaceman technology that they had procured from this crash, which again, the whole reverse engineering thing and all this stuff. The thing from traveling from one point of space to another, interesting, but it's still only a piece of paper that could have been from anybody. And I'm not going to mock a dead man by saying Stanton Friedman was a shill, but I wouldn't be surprised that if it came out one day he was working for the intelligence services with a specific brief of keeping the mythology of Roswell and the alien visitation thing alive.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. It's kind of like from that same era that there was Project COINTEL that was designed. That one was designed to discredit any sort of occult information, right? And so it's like that whole psychological warfare era that began at the beginning of the Cold War, and the battlefield switched from, nuclear technology and weapons that would fuck up the entire, an entire country and send them back to a previous era. That's like the battlefield transformed from the physical battlefield to the battlefield of the mind, and with that, there was COINTEL, there was MK Ultra, there was all these acronyms. Most of them that have not. Yep. Which one?
McCarthyism.
A
huge part in this.
And with that, there's, I'm sure, many of them that we have no idea about that have never been declassified. And I tend to agree with that concept that the whole Roswell thing was designed as a way to give that idea that the U.S. had a tactical edge against the U.S. and or the Allies had a tactical edge against the Soviet Union, against any other powers that may have had their eyes on the U.S. at that time. So we're talking about the Soviet. The Soviet infiltration of most of the world. They were kind of some of the globalists before our current globalists were, right? You're talking about if they're coming into the eastern part of Europe long before our current globalists were. I'd imagine they had outposts throughout other places besides just the USSR, and so it was just one of those things. Just like with is within the film Men Who Stare at Goats, where it's like the idea that before the Russians develop a concept of psychic spies, we need to make sure the U.S. has psychic spies. And who did it first? Was there a rumor that the U.S. had psychic spies, or were we responding to the Soviet Union having psychic spies? And it's just one of those things where they developed a lot of the technology battlefield technology of the mind, which is nothing new. I mean, psychological warfare isn't something that was invented in the 1950s, but using it through the mass media, because that's pretty much when the television was put in front of kids, right? Was at the end of the World War II era.
It was a brilliant thing. I mean, you have to, whoever put it together, the OSS or the CIA, you have to admire them for this. Yeah. How the whole thing was micromanaged. It's hard for people to know now, but after World War II, the United States was sitting on top of the world. It was basically the only believing it was the only superpower standing. Europe had been destroyed. So the United States had the world to itself, basically. And then all of a sudden, the backward Russians first detonated a hydrogen bomb. And then they put Sputnik into space. Now, the Sputnik thing was actually a traumatic thing for the US administration. Here was a Soviet satellite flying over American soil, and there was nothing they could do about it. So the whole thing of the spaceman thing and the US getting spaceman technology was a brilliant piece of propaganda. And they made sure that Hollywood made all kinds of movies, like the Day the Earth Stood Still, where the aliens, there was always that whole thing, well, we'll only believe it when they land on the White House lawn. Notice that?
Oh, yep.
They never on the Kremlin. It was always the thing that somehow if aliens ever came to Earth, they absolutely would side with the Americans. And this was people actually needed this because they were traumatized by Sputnik. Yep. They were actually traumatized by it. And by the hydrogen bomb as well, especially after the whole Ethel and Julius Rosenberg thing that went on. So, I don't believe it. And but I do find these stories fantastically interesting from the propaganda and the sort of like intelligence services point of view.
Yeah. I mean, like the television thing, that before then you had radio, right? And radio was a little bit more, it wasn't as strong of a propaganda tool as the nightly news on the television. And then that's just evolved into, the scrying screen that everybody keeps in their pocket with them now, where it's just it's the way that the delivery mechanism of the weaponry of social engineering and not mind control necessarily, but still mind control too. In
the US, subliminal messages were illegal in the early days of TV and in movies and at that point. It was until I think it was the 60s when they banned them. But there's actually loads of things on YouTube you can find of CIA messages that have been blasted on TV shows and stuff like that in the late 1950s.
Yeah. And I mean, that really wouldn't surprise me if there's still some kind of hypnotism technology being used. I mean, that's what neurolinguistic programming is, right? Where you're basically hypnotizing the subject and you're using that kind of dissociated state that's installed during the hypnotic state and then implanting suggested. So here's Timoney. I think, are you able to join us?
Yeah, he just got picked up.
All right. So we'll wrap this one up and I'll have Timoney read the next story here, but I'm going to move my chair over. So if Thomas, if you want to talk for a few minutes while we get things set up here.
Okay, you can put me on screen or whatever. Yes, the subliminal thing, people make the assumption that because it was banned in the late 1950s and early 1960s, it never ever existed ever again. The only reason they stopped doing the subliminal thing is because they found something better. And it was things like mind control, NLP, and all kinds of other things. They're always, remember the MK Ultra program was basically designed to do things like this, to control us and to get into our minds. So it never ended. So the only way they mothball one program, the only reason they do that is because they already have the replacement set up.
Hi. I made it.
You made it.
How are you?
Good. That's
good,
half an hour taken off your pay.
That's right. Oh, damn. Sick kids.
Yeah.
Okay. Did y'all finish up the first one entirely? Finished all your thoughts and everything? Okay, cool. Okay. So you ready for me to do the second one? Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's now it feels like the show.
Yeah.
It feels like Mama has arrived. It feels like Mama has arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. Normally my son doesn't get picked up for another hour and a half, but his dad just got off work early. So it worked out.
Yeah. It didn't work with me and Jason. It looks sad.
I bring the looks. The looks and the legs. Okay. Here we go. Excuse me. Unidentified flying square metal object filmed over Springfield, Missouri. This was filmed on October 29th of this year. Electrician Justin Johnson said he was on his way home, driving north of Glenstone Avenue in Springfield, Missouri, at about 5 p.m. on October 18th. Excuse me, it was published the 29th, when he spotted a square metal object spinning wildly in the air, seeming only a few hundred feet off of the ground. Johnson filmed the object for just over a minute, later posting the footage to his YouTube channel. The object was heading southwest from the northeast part of town, he said, and at first he thought it was a helicopter, although his opinion quickly changed as he continued to watch the object. As it got closer, I thought it was a balloon or trash blowing around, he said in a statement on YouTube. As I got right up on it, I could clearly see it was a cube spinning or wobbling on an axis. As he watched, the object appeared to stop moving and hover over Springfield's downtown, at which point Johnson was able to park his work vehicle in the turn lane and retrieve his phone to film it. By the time he was able to start recording, he needed to use the phone's 12 times zoom to capture the object. Johnson described the object as a cube spinning or wobbling on an axis that looked like it had auras coming off the bottom and middle. I know it is reflecting sunlight, but it also seemed as though there were lights going around it at about center mass and lower, he said. Due to being tired from a long day and the fact that this encounter took place during rush hour traffic, Johnson said he didn't linger for very long, but after he stopped recording, he was able to watch it for about a minute longer before it flew northwest towards the Willard, Missouri area and then disappeared. Assuming he wasn't the only one who had seen the object, Johnson called his parents since they live in the area. They said they didn't see anything, but that they heard a loud noise at the time I was seeing this, he said. So far, the leading skeptical explanation for Johnson's sighting is that he witnessed a cubic mylar balloon caught in a draft. Cubic mylar balloons, such as the one pictured, can be purchased at Party City for $6. Not everyone believes the skeptical explanation, and Johnson's sightings prompted others to come forward with sightings of their own. I saw the same object, Justin Tasselmeyer commented, about 13 years ago while driving northeast on I-88 in central New York. It was over a field, only about 500 feet off the ground. A metallic cube about 10 feet in diameter, spinning and rotating while stationary. The sun would reflect off the sides as it rotated. When I saw your video, it sent chills through me, as it is identical in appearance and behavior. As for Johnson, he has his own reasons for disbelieving the skeptical hypothesis presented. This thing has haunted me after witnessing it, he said. According to records, the object was flying against the wind that day, so I don't believe it was a balloon. Plus, the Federal Aviation Administration said they showed nothing in that area during that time. I've never seen a drone like that and couldn't understand how it would stay in the air with that much flipping. I really couldn't tell you what it is, but it's nothing publicly known about, he added. If I had to put money on a guess, it would be otherworldly origins or secret government tech. Contrary to Johnson's statement, weather data for that time and location indicates the wind was blowing at 9 miles per hour out of the southeast during his sighting, meaning that the object's final heading of northwest would place it with the wind. Although the object has not been conclusively identified, the weather data available does support the hypothesis that what Johnson witnessed was a balloon, especially if its originally perceived heading of southwest can be linked to another weather phenomenon. It's aliens. It's totally aliens.
This is the real thing. There's lots of reason for this being the real thing. One is the mylar balloon thing. I've seen a few videos that are definitely where mylar balloons passed off as a alien, as a UFO. Mylar balloons are really, really shiny on a sunny day. And when you zoom in with a camera, you get a mylar balloon, or you get a bunch of mylar balloons, and they really reflect really brightly. This thing didn't. It's kind of grayish. It doesn't reflect the sunlight, which is really strange, which suggests it's not fully solid. It's almost like semi-solid, as if it's made up of like millions of balls or something. And light can pass through it, but also reflects off some parts of it. It shape shifts. That's another one. It flies. It changes direction. That's not a mylar balloon. You zoom in on it, it becomes more and more unbelievably strange. It goes. You can't. The definition disappears because when you zoom in on it, it's actually not there. It's actually a void in the matrix.
Like its density gets less the closer up you look at it.
It's not there. Like the Loch Ness Monster, you zoom in, you won't get him. You won't see a little fellow with a tam o' shanter on his head. It's just a void. But it creates a disturbance in the field behind it. Yeah, that's the real thing. And it's very interesting what another thing what that gentleman said about it haunted him.
Yeah, that was the part that really stood out to me too, was the feeling that he described after seeing it.
Yeah.
That's
the real thing.
Yeah.
Now, what this is, we don't know. It's a reflection of human consciousness. If it truly is some kind of force from another dimension, but that's the real shit. That's, forget like those of you folks who are watching this program. And the first show was about Stanton Friedman and Roswell. Forget all about that. You've been led down the false path by that. The real thing is the strangeness of it, and the reason why they want you thinking about nuts and bolts spaceships and Roswell is because the powers that big can't explain this stuff themselves. And they're baffled by it. And they don't like us knowing that we know that they're baffled by it.
And it horrifies them too, because they have no control over it. Yeah. Especially because it's probably known it's not the US, it's not the Soviets, it's not China, it's not CCP, and I imagine this kind of stuff has been seen for eons, right? People have been seeing shit like this in the sky. And I had an experience seeing something like this when it was 2016 or maybe 2017. It was either in the fall of 2016 or the spring of 2017, maybe in the winter between the two, over in Olympia, Washington, when I was living in that area. And at first I thought it was a party balloon, and it wasn't that high off the ground, but it's one of those things too, where it wasn't entirely solid. It wasn't like something that you could go, okay, that's physically there. But this was kind of like right at the beginning of, like, I'd say kind of like my real introduction into the occult and the Fortean, where it's like I was at a kind of an initiatory point in my own life where this might have been something I was exteriorizing out of myself. But I tried to get a video of it with my phone, and somewhere on a hard drive back at my old house, I've got the video of it, and I'll have to see if I can put it up in Beyond Room 313 sometime. But to me, it looked kind of almost like a person. It looked kind of like it had like limbs, and it's like, I know that somebody had just posted like a video, I think it was from San Diego or the San Diego area of a jetpack man, that they thought it was like someone in a jetpack, but it was actually, there wasn't anything like that, but it was similar to that. But to me, it looked almost more like a knight in armor, but it was the same thing. It was like spinning around, and I got a video of it. It's somewhere on a hard drive, and it could have been, it could have been a balloon, it could have been a drone, it could have been a toy, but it was just so strange. And I'll have to dig that up somewhere when I go get my hard drives from my old house. But yeah, but it was just a real strange thing. And it wasn't a spaceship. It wasn't something like that. It could have been something I was exteriorizing out of my own consciousness, or it could have been something like that. But it was at a very kind of pivotal point in my life. I had just gotten out of the military, not too far behind that. And so I was at a real transitional point in my life. But yeah, these things, I think they're real. And I think there's no real explanation for it in our current paradigm scientifically. I think in our paradigm here in the Week in Strange and Beyond Room 313, we can talk about these being something almost like a tulpa, or something that's been created. If it is something physical, it's not going to be, someone from Zeta Reticuli coming over in a nuts and bolts spacecraft, but it could be some sort of exteriorization that's turned into a tulpa, or that have turned into this kind of phenomena where they are something semi-physical, or some like a golem or a tulpa or something, that there's an awareness that people have projected into them, and they've manifested because there's such an amount of attention on them. Just like we were talking about the Sasquatch concept of, this local folklore being manifest in this way. I would imagine, we've got UFOs and strange phenomena in the sky being a type of folklore that we have here in the US. So when there's some force of nature that presents itself to people, it'll present itself in this way, something that, the psyche of the American mind will mock up as a UFO, where somebody with a traditional Irish background will see the fairy, someone will see gnomes, someone will, it'll come in whatever form is there in kind of the archetypal consciousness of the people. So I'd imagine here in the US, there's a tremendous archetypal attention on UFOs. So there's going to be people catalytically exteriorizing UFOs around them. Was it Marjorie Cameron after the Babylon working Didn't she have her UFO sighting there in 46, 47?
She was interestingly, she was actually one of the first people in the USA to actually make an official police report on seeing a UFO.
No.
And we all know what happened after the Babylon working the strange rocket ships that started appearing over Scandinavia,
right?
Almost like day is. And you can get fooled. I was nearly fooled by a bunch of Mylar balloons once. It was in Bangor in County Down, and I was standing just over the harbour side, and coming along Belfast Lock was this silver thing rotating in the sky, very powerful. And then I was going, oh, that's really odd, and got closer. And it was a bunch of Mylar balloons, probably about 10 of them, that someone was probably selling them and they escaped, and they have them all together sometimes at fairgrounds or in front of a store, and they all escaped and they were still tied together. But, it was when I did have my first real UFO experience about 6 years ago now, while I was packing the car at Strand Hill near where I live, and I saw this egg-shaped thing moving across the sky slowly. It was completely different than the Mylar balloon thing. And again, it had the same thing that this thing in this video has. It seems like an animal. It seems alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sentientness to it. And I was going to say one last thing about the Babylon working. It's like after that was when the Roswell incident and anything like that came into awareness. It was after Hubbard and Parsons did the both Babylon workings where people started seeing stuff in the sky.
It's interesting that the first UFOs appeared in Germany, and Germany was the father of the space program. They got the first rocket into space, the V2, but then it was taken over by the United States after the space engineers went with Operation Paperclip. So it's almost like if these Tulpas or whatever follow the space project. And that's probably what led the Soviets to things like cosmism and actually believing that there was a spiritual dimension to space travel.
I've always wondered, I've never seen a UFO like that. I hope someday that I do. The things that I've seen, and I wonder if other people have had it this way too. I've seen them, whatever it is, manifest as planets. The one that stands out in my mind, and there's been 3 times, but the one that was the most vivid, that, when you have a deja vu and it's like, sometimes it just lasts for a second, and then sometimes it lasts for minutes. And then you're watching yourself experience this weird deja vu, but it's not ending. It was like that, but it wasn't deja vu. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I'd come home with my family after it was nighttime. So wherever we were coming home from, the grocery store or something. And we lived on top of a hill, and I went upstairs, and we had a big wall of windows that looked out towards the east. And it was bigger than the moon. Like it appeared to me to be bigger and closer than the moon, but it was Saturn. And it was an instant, I was mesmerized. I couldn't move. It wasn't a feeling of fear, but it was like I was totally locked in. It was almost like it was hypnotic. It wasn't almost, it was hypnotic. And the more that I stared at it, the closer or the bigger that it got. And it went on for several minutes. And I remember the only thing that brought me out of it was my mom was like, hey, she shook me, and it took a few times before I snapped out of it. So that's whatever these things are, however they manifest, however different people see them. I've always wondered if anyone else has had that experience of it appearing as like a planet.
No. I had a friend in Manchester, Steve King. He described that to me one day. We were driving through Manchester, and he was telling me that I once saw another moon in the sky a few months ago, just above this road, and appeared for a few minutes and vanished. Have you ever heard of such a thing? And I'd never heard of it, and no one had ever mentioned this kind of thing until you just now. So you're the second person who told me that.
And that actually just tripped another memory for me. I don't remember if this happened that same night, but it happened around the same age. That song, Mr. Sandman, Bring Me a Dream? My mom and my grandma used to always sing that to me as a lullaby. And so, I was 7 or 8 years old. It was around the same time. And I woke up one night. I used to get really, really bad night terrors. And not just night terrors, but my body it felt like my legs were being broken. And I'd wake up, but I couldn't move. And the only thing I could do was I could cry, but no sound would come out. But so one day I woke up like that, but there was no pain. and I wasn't in fear, but there was this figure hovering over the foot of my bed. He was probably like 3 feet tall. And the shape of him was almost like the ghosts in Pac-Man, kind of that same shape, but he was made out of sand, but the sand was moving. His body was made out of moving sand, and he had on this black top hat, and he was carrying like a wicker basket. And I don't remember what was in the basket or if anything was in it. And I just sat because I couldn't do anything other than look at it. And so I looked at it for several minutes, and then I was like, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and try and go back to sleep. And then I'll open them again in a few minutes. And if it's still there, then I'm not dreaming. And so I did that, and it was still there. And then, but I never had any feelings of fear about it. But yeah, then I finally did drift off back to sleep, and I never saw him again. So I don't know what that is.
Good story. How old were you again?
It was about 7 or 8.
Yeah, that's it. That's pretty intense. Yeah, it's interesting about the sand thing.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, with it being composed of something like, when you mentioned it being composed of sand, it reminds me when I know my mom's watching this one here, and she'll remember me talking about the light fixtures, but when I was like probably 3 years old, when we first moved to Ventura, California, I had an encounter with something in the bedroom of the apartment that we just moved to that was like a 2-dimensional sheet that had kind of moved across the room towards me. And it was composed of all these little specks of, I want to say it was like yellow and purple light, like pixels. Like if you zoom in with a camera really close onto a computer screen, you get that pixelated, all the different colors of pixels. It was something like that. And I remember I was in there with, I think it was just my dad. My mom might've been in there too, but I remember pointing and going, "What's that?" And I was pointing near enough to the light fixture. And my dad's like, "That's the light fixture." So I'm like, okay, these light fixtures, whatever the fuck that means. But it was just like this thing that was composed of little bits of light. And then Thomas, when we were making Liber Velocity, it was shortly after I had recorded the voiceover for the Bornless one, the Bornless Rite. And shortly thereafter, I was trying to go to bed. I had some really bad insomnia, and as I was starting to drift into being partially asleep, I had that same kind of phenomena occur, but this time it was like purple, blue. There's like purple and blue little pixel things, but it was making up one of those ophanims, the little rings that were in joined together, like the biblical angels that are moving around with all the eyes on them. And it was there in the room when my eyes were open and when my eyes were closed. It didn't matter if my eyes were open or shut. There was that projection. So I don't know if that's like with the phosphenes thing, where at the prisoner cinema, where your brain projects out the light by itself.
I mean, the Bornless Rite does definitely work for everyone. If you do it properly, it'll definitely work for you. It's it opens the door pathway into the other dimensions, realities, and it's opened by a headless Egyptian individual, according to the Oprah that appears on, and it's the opening of something. So you're actually hacking the physical world when you do the Bornless Rite, and it's very like there's I don't know anyone who ever did the Bornless Rite and never had a paranormal experience.
Yeah. And I was sweating my ass off while I was doing it. I think I recorded it probably 3 or 4 times to get the best audio out of it. And yeah, built up quite the charge. And then just that thing, like Timoney, when you said about it being composed of sand, it just reminded me of like something that was made of a composite of something else. And it just like these lights, whether it was like pixels. And you did something with the visuals there in Liber Velocity that reminded me of it too. You did this kind of pixelated thing. I'm like, yep, that's very similar to what I saw. But yeah, so whatever this UFO is that they saw, yeah, it's definitely the real thing. And it's just we can't put a solid definition on it and say it's one thing or another, but it's definitely something.
Yeah, another possibility is it could have been a working by a magician. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was an amazing piece of footage of spinning lights in the sky, rotating in the most bizarre way above Northampton in England. And who lives in Northampton in England but Alan Moore. And immediately when I saw these crazy lights over Northampton, and it was also followed by a clown flap in the town, where people were seeing men dressed as clowns appearing on street corners and then vanishing. I knew it was him doing some kind of working. So that's another possibility too. It could be an operation similar to what with Boleskine and Crowley with the Loch Ness Monster. It probably could be a manifestation caused by a magical operation.
That would be my favorite explanation. I hope that's what it is. Okay. Here we go. This one is from November 1st, so just a few days ago. I didn't know if I believed in the afterlife. Then my dead father sent me a message. Did your dad pass recently, Noah? The medium asked. I think this is him and he has a message. Do you want to hear it? I've always been curious about the supernatural. When I was a kid, I begged my parents for a subscription to the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown book series and spent hours paging through them, through the thin, hardbound black books and gawking at blurry photos of Bigfoot and fuzzy, unexplained lights hovering in formation over some lonely mesa in New Mexico. But the volume I found most captivating was about mediums. The idea that a person could function as a mystical transistor radio and pick up messages from the afterworld thrilled and also terrified me. I was especially fascinated by a woman who had lived a century earlier and had ceremoniously oozed ectoplasm from her orifices, sometimes in the shape of a gooey hand, excuse me, or even someone's face, whenever she spoke with the dead. I had so many questions. Could we really come back, even if it's just for a few seconds, in the form of a mysterious, garbled memo beamed into the head of someone with the ability to pick up these ghostly radio waves? And if so, what would we say? What would it feel like to hear them? To be reached by someone who had left Earth, but hadn't entirely left their earthly life behind? Determined to find out, I tried to initiate conversations with spirits in my bedroom before I fell asleep. I'd offer up an open invitation to whoever or whatever might be floating by our house, whispering, if there's anyone here who wants to talk to me, I'm listening, don't be afraid. I was never completely sure if I was trying to convince the ghosts or myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I didn't know what I'd do if one actually showed up, or heaven help me, I started dripping ectoplasm from my ears, but it didn't really matter because I never got a response. Because I still wanted to be part of the strange mystical world that I hoped but wasn't entirely persuaded existed, I decided that if I couldn't be a medium, I would study them. And I wrote to the Parapsychology Institute at Duke University about my plan. This was in the 80s, years before our culture's current infatuation with the paranormal, and some sweet research assistant was kind enough to indulge this 10-year-old weirdo by mailing me a few crudely photocopied studies about psychokinesis and remote viewing, none of which I understood. By the time I got to college, I realized I had no apparent extrasensory abilities, and I wasn't good enough at science or math to earn a spot at a foundation attempting to prove that life exists after death. So I began indulging in my only other option, visiting psychics. My first experience was at a shop in downtown Minneapolis when I was 18. It had a neon crystal ball glowing in its window and a weathered sandwich board sign offering a $10 reading leaning next to its door. When I finally got the courage to go inside, I found a middle-aged woman chain smoking at a table crowded with a half-eaten carton of soggy fries, a pack of tarot cards, and a small TV. She seemed annoyed that I was interrupting the episode of Oprah she was watching, but she motioned for me to sit down. After I handed her my money, she asked to see my palm. She looked at it for just a few seconds before warning me that the ghost of an ex-girlfriend was ruining my life. Her voice got lower and quieter as she emphasized how grave my situation was, but she perked up when she told me not to worry because she could banish the ghost if I gave her another $150. Seeing as I was gay and had never been on a date, much less had a girlfriend, I was unimpressed. Still, I wanted to believe. I wanted there to be someone waiting for us in the great waiting room in the sky. So I continued to visit psychics throughout my 20s, and I continued to be disappointed. No matter who I met or where I went to meet them, no one ever gave me a reading that felt remotely genuine or accurate or personal. If the dead could talk, they had nothing to say to any of these so-called psychics or to me. Then, when I was 28 years old, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had never smoked. He walked several miles a day with his beloved Siberian Terrier, Harry, and he always took a handful of vitamins and supplements with his breakfast. He loved his life, his family, especially my mom, and his job. and he wanted to live as long as he could so he can enjoy all of it for as long as he could. Cancer didn't care. Within 5 months, he was transformed from the sharpest, smartest, sweetest man I have ever known into a slobbering, withering, moaning 80-pound zombie. 4 weeks after he became the monster in our very own horror movie, he was dead, and I was devastated. My mom, the toughest woman I have ever known or will ever know, wasn't just devastated, she was destroyed. My parents had been together for over 3 decades, and they had the kind of love you'd swear was a sham, that it must have been engineered in some perky, permanently Christmas decorated laboratory deep within the offices of the Hallmark Channel, because there was no way it could be that pure or unwavering, but it was. With my dad gone, my mom had no idea how she was going to keep living and honestly had no real interest in it. But she clung to my brothers and me and somehow strung one day to the next until they piled up and began to almost resemble something like a life again. But none of us were fooled, least of all her, and we knew nothing would ever be the same. Ironically, I didn't try to reach my dad after he died. Before his death, my obsession with mediums had been merely theoretical, a quaint hobby, a low-stakes leisure activity, a fun way to spend $50 on a Saturday afternoon. But now everything was different. He visited me in my dreams sometimes, and it was good to see him healthy again, almost glowing in his old body, even if he didn't say much. But even that was almost more than I could take. Part of me was afraid of what would happen if I tried contacting him and he didn't show up. Would that mean that he was truly gone, that there was nothing waiting for us out there, or maybe worse, that he didn't care enough to come back? Part of me was afraid of what would happen if I tried contacting him and he did show up. Would that mean that he wasn't at peace? And what would he say? Would I even want to hear it? 2.5 years after his death, I was working at a magazine and I was given the opportunity to interview a medium. This man had a reputation for knowing things that people just shouldn't know. And I was curious to find out if he might actually be able to do the things that so many others claimed they could, but couldn't. We met at a restaurant in Manhattan that was supposedly haunted and filmed a fairly fluffy, lighthearted video about his unusual ability. The interview went well. The medium was kind and humble and seemed more like a middle school principal than someone who spent his days relaying messages from dead relatives. When we finished, we had lunch together at the restaurant, and after some friendly small talk, he asked me if I wanted a reading. I was caught off guard because I was there for business, not pleasure, and because I knew he charged hundreds of dollars and was booked years in advance, I didn't think he would offer me one. I told him that it wasn't necessary, but he said it was no trouble. This was just what he did, and that he'd be happy to show me how he worked. So I agreed. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't wondering if my dad might show up, but I also didn't want to get my hopes up. Whenever I visit a psychic, I always use the same protocol. I don't provide more information than needed to. I respond with nothing more than a yes or a no. And I'm always on the lookout for questions like, do you know someone who passed with a name that begins with a J or an M? Or did someone die from some kind of disease in their chest? That are suspiciously vague and could apply to any number of people. I wanted this man to be different from the other mediums I had seen, but I wasn't going to make it easy for him. He began the reading by telling me there was a short, loudmouth woman with red hair standing behind me, and she was pointing to herself saying, Ethel. Ethel, Ethel, Ethel. She's practically yelling this. Is this your grandma? He asked, and I froze. My dad's mom was a short, loudmouth redhead, and she looked exactly like the actress Ethel Merman, so much so that we used to call her that. Now, obviously, lots of grandmas are short and have big mouths, and some have red hair, and some are named Ethel. But the combination of the four together made me wonder if something unusual was unfolding. What's more, because her name wasn't actually Ethel, that was just a nickname my family gave her, this wasn't something that this man could have Googled. I told him that I understood what he was saying, but didn't elaborate exactly what part meant something to me. Still, just 30 seconds in, he officially had my attention. The next 10 minutes of the reading were a blur of people and events and comments, like there's someone here who owned a bakery in the 20s or 30s, and they were known for their little pies. Since I don't know much about my extended family or my ancestors, much of it meant nothing to me, but I liked that he was giving me specific details, even if I couldn't confirm or deny any of them. Other than the appearance of the woman who might have been my grandma, most of the reading felt like paging through a friend's photo album or attending a reunion for someone else's family. A lot of folks I didn't know were showing up to say hi. None of them had anything they really wanted to tell me, and most disappointingly, there was no sign of my dad. And then suddenly, the medium straightened up in his chair. Oh, There is a man here with Ethel. I think it's her son. Does this mean anything to you? He asked. Yes, I responded, maybe too eagerly. Did your dad pass recently, Noah? He asked. Yes. I think this is him and he has a message. Do you want to hear it? I inhaled sharply and held my breath longer than I wanted it to be held. Could it really be my dad? Could the ghost of the guy who didn't believe in ghosts or God or heaven or hell or the existence of anything after death except falling into the deepest, darkest, soundest sleep really have whooshed off whatever cloud he'd been sunbathing on and into this little cafe to slip me some secret he hadn't managed to do so while he was alive? And if so, what is it? Yes, I want to hear it, I told him. Okay, he's saying this very clearly. I can hear him very clearly. Tell Ruth I love her. My entire body went numb. My mom's middle name was Ruth, and even though no one called her that, for as long as my parents had been together, my dad had only ever referred to her as Ruthie. It was stunning, but not at all surprising. If my father were given one more chance to say anything to anyone, this would be it. Oh, and there's something else. He wants you to tell Ruth that she can get rid of his ties now. He's saying it's time to let them go. Again, I was shocked. My dad had been an attorney and had an incredible collection of neckties. Whenever he'd go on vacation, he'd buy a tie from whatever country he visited, and aside from his watches, which he'd given to my brothers and me just weeks before he died, they were his prized possessions. I also knew that though my dad had died years earlier, my mom still hadn't been able to get rid of his things. My brothers and I didn't push her to either. We figured there was no harm in our dad's closet staying full until whenever she was ready, even if that took another 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years. But here was my dad, my mom's greatest champion and biggest fan, raising whatever phantom energy he could muster to try to nudge her to do something closer to closure. Everything I'd just been told made complete sense, and it all made no sense at all. The reading ended shortly after that, and I thanked the medium. On my way back to my office, my body thrummed with the energy and peculiarity of what had just happened. I felt like I'd eaten 3 Thanksgiving dinners and then rode a roller coaster on repeat for a week. My stomach was flip-flopping, my head was pounding, and my heart felt 16 times too big for my chest. But what exactly had just happened? How could this man have known those things? How could he have Googled me and found my dad's obituary, my mom's middle name, a photo of my grandma? But what about the Ethel thing? And how could he have known about the ties still hanging in my dad's closet? Did he just guess that, like many lawyers, he had a lot of them, and like many widows, my mom still hadn't given them away? I wanted to believe, but I couldn't shake my skepticism. I'd had too many experiences with too many fakes. Still, I understood why so many people spend so much money on mediums, often more money than they should or have to spend. The chance, however slim, to hear from my dad was just too enticing to turn down, and making contact with him, however improbable, had been intoxicating. That's pretty much it. Did you guys hear the feedback sound? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think we had 3 or 4 EVPs during that coming out of my speakers here on the computer. Yeah.
That gave me chills reading that. It's kind of a longer one, but I really wanted to include it. Just the story and the way that he wrote it was so heartfelt. And there was a lot of emotion.
Very
moving.
moving.
There was a lot of emotion in it.
Now, to be a complete bastard now. I subscribe to the concept of Bardo that when you die, you hang around for a few days or a few weeks, then you go on to your next life for your end of your reincarnation cycle, whatever you do. And after those weeks have passed, that period of Bardo has passed, you're just not capable, you just can't be contacted anymore. Now, I used to subscribe to a Theosophist newsletter, and they had very good articles on one of them about from spiritualist writings around the turn of the 20th century. And they were all adamant that these people in Theosophy were adamant that you only have a limited period to contact your dead loved ones, and through psychics or through mediums or even yourself. And sometimes they just appear in front of you. That's another thing that happens. But it's only in that grace period. After that grace period, you're dealing with demons. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's evil or something like that. In fact, a good psychic who is doing this is just a real deal. But what they are demonologists, really. So, I say 2 or 3 years after a relative you know dies, they are getting these voices whispered in their ear. There's an Ethel in the hall. There's an Ethel in the hall. Your father died of cancer, right? The demon is telling them this and they're saying, well, how do you notice it's not on Google? Well, demons were always used by the cunning folk to get information that wasn't available to normal channels. So they knew they could find buried treasure, common one. They could learn things about people because they traveled backward and forward in space-time. And so these demonic entities would be the ones whispering into people's ears saying this, that, and the other. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing because it provides a beautiful healing thing for people as well. But I'm firmly of the belief that you're here under the bardo for a little while and then you're gone. Because Harry Houdini, the attempts to contact him were made far too late after he died. There was a very public event on live radio to contact Harry Houdini, but it was months after he died, so he would have been long gone by that point anyway. So that's how I feel about it. If the person finds healing from this, even if the medium is a bullshitter, even if the medium is actually a demonologist and doesn't know it, I think there's great value in that.
You know, what's always interesting too is there's the like what you're saying with the demonic thing, Thomas, where you'll get entities that come through that can see the version of that relative loved one in the mind of the person they attach to, and they can create a facsimile of that loved one. And then the darker side of it too being the attachment that these entities can do based on that old psychic wound, which I think is a terribly fucked up thing that sometimes you'll find entities that'll do that they'll find the weak spot, just like within trauma-based mind control where somebody's been abused or someone's been gone through something traumatic. There's that weak spot in their psychic armor, and there'll be an entity that comes along to exploit that weak spot. So that's why I'm always wary of mediums, just because a lot of times they'll have entities just in their space there. That, you know, that's what they're doing their craft through. And yeah, some of them are doing like the cunning folk thing. Was it Oberon, the king of the fairies? Thomas, is that the one that? Yeah. Oberon, or like even working with the Goetia when you're talking about using like using King Paimon or using something to find buried treasure or something like that. A lot of times, I think you'll find people that are using these kind of entities that will pose as something else to make it feel harmonious with the obsessive, with the person that's invoking that entity, just to get past the psychic firewall. And that's something I'm always very, very cautious about is anything that gets beyond the psychic firewall. But yes, on the other hand, there is the healing side of it, Thomas, as you mentioned, that can help people get closure. We're not all entities, not all jinn, not all demons, not all spirits out there are necessarily malicious or malicious as viewed by the human that's their obsessive. You know, sometimes they will be working together in a it gives one of these non-corporeal entities a life to exist in, a body, just like sometimes a piece of art, a piece of music, some body of work, an entity can inhabit it to give it life itself. And I think that's kind of how we get into the jinn folklore, right? Where these entities want to have a body to exist in, or want to have something, even if it's a non-physical body, to give life to it. So I think there is that too, when people are talking to mediums, where something can come in and they might not necessarily, like an entity itself might not be able to incarnate into, a new baby body or something, but it can live on in someone's mind and become semi-autonomous and do whatever its will is here in this universe by putting itself in that kind of etheric body that's in someone's memory, that does bring the person closure, and also doesn't do something to fuck with them, like some kind of demonic attachment that's like a vampiric thing. So yeah. I think there are a lot of entities out there that are vampiric, that I was just talking to Timoney about this. There's like the people out there that are like trauma vampires that'll sit and listen to all your problems and give you space and a safe space to come talk to, but really, like, there's an entity behind those eyes that's like feeding off of like, oh, tell me more, me more about.
I've had that experience a couple of times. Yeah. And it's usually the kindly, friendly soul, right? The helpful, listening soul, but they constantly remind you of your trauma, where a real friend will say, let's talk about it. Okay, talked about it. Okay, let's move on. Let's make plans for the future. Let's get you out of this. The trauma vampire does the reverse. It constantly brings up your trauma. I remember a woman I knew about 10 years ago told me a story that she knew some woman she knew the husband had walked out on her and she was devastated, and she had this trauma vampire who was saying, was the rock, for her, and she finally figured out that she was feeding off her trauma when the guy got married, and she posted onto Facebook the photographs of the wedding only a year after he'd left this other woman, with the specific purpose of the other woman seeing her ex-husband getting married. And she put up there, can you believe he's getting married already? And that was done to deliberately feed off the pain and the hurt of the woman that she was claiming to support. So those trauma vampires, there's definitely something. And they're always very often they're the kindly old lady. You'll often find the kindly old lady. This is why you have to be very careful, folks, around counselors and stuff like that. They're very careful, like grief counselors or bereavement counselors. That was kind of covered a bit in that movie, Hereditary. She was in the bereavement council, but they were all like part of the coven, half of them. So you got to be careful with all that stuff. But on a positive side, let me say that if you do lose someone close and you do see them in a couple of weeks appearing in your room or something, or in a dream, that's the real thing. But you've only got a short, limited period of bardo for that to happen.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that has been something that I've thought a lot about before. And especially the longer, reincarnation's always been a thing for me ever since I was really little. I just really, I guess, didn't have the word for it or whatever yet. But yeah, just as I've grown up and gotten older, that's never been a thing that I've even questioned. But I always did wonder how that fits in with mediums and psychics. And I think we've talked about this before, probably a few times. Yeah, just that whole concept. So I'm glad that we have these discussions, because it definitely helps me to kind of work things out and understand more. And the demonology thing, that really makes a whole lot of sense. But yeah. I'm really interested to go back and listen to this recording later, because I think we just got our first EVPs on this show. I think we got 3 or 4 of them.
There's also this weird things happening on the light in the room that you're in as well. So
yeah,
it's dropping, and it's not the light in the ceiling. It's a weird light. It's a weird kind of lighting up thing.
I was just gonna say, halfway through reading that, I got really, really shaky, and I had to pass the mic off for a second because my hand was shaking a lot. It didn't feel bad. It felt like an energy jolt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I was even watching the door behind you, or the cloth on the wall to see if there's any movement, because there was definitely, I could feel it on this end too. I could tell by the way you were going. You were kind of like almost in a trance when you were reading at one point.
Yeah, there's just such a straight talking about, standing waves of energy and entities and stuff. This house, I think we talked about this before, and it was the last Week in Strange or one of the previous Week in Strange, that just on the other side of that wall, there's that really, really bad energy in there, and there's definitely something from a traumatic incident that's still in there. There's still like a standing wave of energy from something that happened. We've tried to read it a few times, and to me, it feels very rapey in there. Like somebody like had a really bad traumatic sexual experience in there. And there's a particular part in the room near that window where it feels like something like that happened. And there's still just like that static electricity charge of some sort of traumatic sexual experience that's in there. And it just hangs around. And then sometimes it's just like real uncomfortable upstairs, like keeping the door to the basement shut just to kind of keep that energy down here. But yeah, talking about something that had this whole idea of something living on after death, where Timoney's reading that, and there's all these weird phenomena happening in here, and I'm getting tingles in my left leg and stuff. And yeah, the light's getting all weird. So yeah, it's just, talking about entities and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It'll be fun analyzing this later on.
I kind of, there was a little tiny bit left of the article, but I couldn't keep reading it, but we'll link it if there was only like maybe a couple more paragraphs and he was just kind of summing up his experience, but I couldn't read it anymore.
Yeah, Marion, I saw your thing about smudging the house. This goes way beyond just using sage. This is I think napalm might work a little bit better, but yeah, sulfur or napalm or maybe a little bit of plutonium, and I don't know. But no, this is far beyond something that's saging. I mean, we've done banishing rituals and all kinds of stuff, done all establishing our own energy in here and things, or establishing individual energy. Because I found that's when people talk about banishing rituals and stuff, it's not about banishing an entity or something, but the act of doing a banishing ritual to establish your own psychic energy that extends out in front of you, behind you, to the left, to the right, above and below you, is what is helpful when you're doing a banishing ritual. Is kind of like, as Crowley said, it's like, the magical equivalent of washing your hands or something. When you're doing like a lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, you're not going to do that to cast away some entity in front of you, but it does help you as the magician put your energy out farther than just, a couple feet in front of your eyes. It helps you put out your energy into a much bigger space, so that you as the person living here or living in the space or staying in that space that you're in, you as the being take up more of that space, so that therefore, you can kind of be the bigger entity if there's something else there, which will help banish forces, whether they're habits or something within your own psychic space. It kind of helps banish that out of the way. Or if there's something there, just to establish your own fucking dominance in the room, so that that's your entity. Energy.
You reminded me of something, Dan. This is why, what you're talking about, that room behind you, this is why the Chinese take the whole feng shui thing so seriously. Now, I had a friend in New York, a guy called Letty Luke. He was from Hong Kong, and his mother used to, clean ghosts out of apartments that she rented, she would throw rice and salt into the area where she thought was haunted, then sweep it all up into a brown paper bag and pour it into the Hudson River. So maybe you could try something like dried rice and salt, around the area, and then sweeping it up and in the bag and then putting it away. She said it used to capture the spirits.
Yeah, I'll try that, because the Columbia River is just east of here, not even a half a mile across the street, less than probably a quarter mile from that wall over there. So.
All right. Well, I think it's about time for a really good psychic weather report.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The weekend psychic weather.
Hello and welcome to this week's psychic weather. Well, I wish I could present a positive one, but I can't, because this is the season of the knife in the back. Now, I've been waiting until this time for a while because I knew it was coming up in November. It comes up in November-ish nearly every year, but it's after Samhain. If someone is going to betray you, it's going to happen now. And you may not find out about the Christmas or the spring, but it's going to happen. And someone you trust, or someone you maybe don't trust, but if they're going to put a knife in your back, it's going to happen now. There's a complex reason for this, and it came out of my research for my second book, Defeated Demons, where I questioned hundreds of people on various experiences they had. And they always said that the beginning of a great betrayal against them, whether it be like in a relationship or a company or something, or to be thrown out of a band even, it always began in the beginning of November. And like that Morrissey song, November Spawned the Monster. Now, there's an element of this that we also have responsibility for, and that is to accept that it's only how we react to the betrayal that generates the power that it has. So if we're aware that something or someone in our lives is about to put a knife in our back, we have to accept that that's what's going to happen. And then we deal with it and move on. We don't deny it. We don't run away. And the best thing is to just cut off no contact if anyone does that to you, because it begins around now. They will be wrapped. Anyone had a plan to deceive you or anything like that, it begins now. Now, on the greater macro level, I'm seeing this all across society. I made a video today, one of my Rona articles, about how all the SJWs and the I fucking love science types have all vanished recently. Well, I can guarantee you that many of them are right now having serious questioning and serious self-analysis of if they're taking the right path in life, because they're feeling betrayed. by what they thought would be a solution that would manifest by this point. It always happens in November, always. And it's happening at a great cosmic level now. So right now, the psychic weather is beware the knife coming to your back. When you become aware of the knife coming into your back, don't fight it, don't rage against it, merely move out of the way and then continue on with your life. And it will happen. And if it happens, that's okay. You have no control over the other person who's doing this to you, but you have control over how you respond to it. And rather than going crazy or making a fool of yourself or raging or screaming, the best thing is always, like I say, no contact ever again. This is the season of the betrayal, the season of the knife in the back, but it's also the season of walking away. So you just accept it. Well, that's it. And you get on. And you don't try to undo it, because it will not be undone. So I wish I had a happier psychic weather report this week, but it's a cautionary one and a useful one. So carry that with you until the next report. Thank you very much.
Is it bad? Is it great? Are you happy? Are you irate? The week in psychic weather.
Thanks, Thomas. That's always, when you give that advice, that's some of the best advice to ever receive on an occult level. The idea of when the best magical self-defense or even offensive move is to do nothing, to not allow that energy to get in and turbulate your own psychic space. Just like with a demonic attachment, there has to be something within you that resonates at that frequency for something to grab onto. And when someone attacks, it's almost like an Aikido move where you don't stiff. Yeah.
Get off the chessboard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree. 100% agree. Don't even engage.
And process the hurt, process the pain, process the sadness. But know that it's nothing you can do will undo it, and nothing you can do will heal it, and nothing you have done to prevent it. The only thing you can do is to walk away from it and begin again.
Yeah. It's a black hole of psychic expense.
Yeah.
Engage with that shit. Okay.
And this runs to about the beginning, the first week of December.
Okay.
Yep.
So we're in for about 4 more weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. Oregon's Van Duzer corridor has had years of bizarre paranormal activity. Is Oregon's Van Duzer corridor haunted? Does this stretch of Highway 18 near Lincoln City have its own Area 51? Locals talk about a secret government facility in the Coast Range, one with dark winding roads leading up to nothing but a huge fence. Individuals are said to appear and disappear on the road, and one person insists that his car was taken over and began to drive by itself. This would be years before Tesla automated driving was a thing. Bigfoot has been rumored to hang out here too, although his legend pales in comparison to some of the other creepy stories surrounding Highway 18. I've driven on this highway, by the way. We've written many times in the past about Oregon's most haunted and paranormal spots, but this is the first time I've personally heard the whisperings about Van Duzer. People have seen everything from weird lights to army bases somewhere in the woods. One rumor has a pair driving through the winding, twisting roadway and feeling like their car was controlled by some unseen force. Another tale, according to Portlander Jason Frank, who has 2 Seattle friends telling him they spotted what looked like a secret military base while hiking in the woods near what was the tiny hamlet of Boyer, Oregon. My dad and mom told me about seeing a UFO on the way home from Salem one night. They were in an area with trees close to Highway 18 and deep ditches on both sides. Ahead of them, a couple of 100 feet, was a vehicle of some sort with a row of lights all around the outside. My mom said there was a man inside. There were lights inside too. He was leaning forward, frantically pushing something they assumed was controls. Suddenly, the vehicle lifted slightly and shot off directly to the south and disappeared. They realized then that there was a car facing them about the same distance they had been. My dad wondered if they had also seen it. That is from 2020. There have also been whispers by locals that a forest road was cut off by the government in the late 1970s, fueling some of the secret base talk. There actually is a government testing facility near Cascade Head that's locked off to the public, but that location is too far away from Highway 18 to have a connection. There's actually a hidden ghost town in the Van Duzer corridor as well, purportedly somewhere just east of Rose Lodge. Articles on the subject will not reveal its location, but comment on it being a collection of 2 or 3 buildings that once comprised a tiny village, now buried beneath a lot of foliage. Allegedly, the spot is just a ways up on a small trail from the highway. My wife and I regularly travel this section of road to and from work, often at night. We know from Lincoln City to home is a 45-minute drive. One night we left after a bite at Maxwell's and headed home. The band was playing their last song. The time was 2 a.m. We both noted that and calculated to ourselves the arrival home time at about 2:45 a.m. We're musicians and had finished our evening gig earlier that night. Upon arriving home, I stepped into the kitchen and glanced at the clock. 4:30 a.m. I turned to check the battery-operated one on the opposite wall. It also read 4:30 a.m. My wife had yet to make it in the door. She was visiting with the dog on the porch. I stepped back out and inquired, "Honey, what time do you think it is?" About 2:45, she replied. "How about 4:30? No way. Yes way. It's 4:30 in the morning, I told her. We both stood and stared at each other as cold chills ran up our spines. We left Lincoln City at a known time. I had checked the clock and arrived home, having made no stops, almost 2 hours late. This would have had to be around the year 2000. To this day, we have no explanation. Neither one of us had been drinking or doing drugs. It is one of the strangest things to ever happen to me. Totally unexplainable." Another personal account of a strange encounter while driving through Van Duzer corridor. This is the same area where my husband and I both saw a man wearing prison attire carrying a heavy metal ball connected to a chain fastened to his ankle. It was a black and white uniform like someone might have worn 100 years ago. This was in broad daylight, and we always thought it was odd. This was 2014. One Facebook user recalls a story that still scares her to this day. One time many years ago, myself and my husband were driving home from the Willamette Valley around 2 a.m. Going through the Van Duzer corridor when it was about 29 degrees out, we come upon a guy walking in shorts and a tank shirt as if it was a sunny day. We worry he might have been broken down somewhere, so we decided to pull up beside him. As he is walking up to my passenger side door window saying, "Oh, I am just walking back to Lincoln," a sudden panic takes over in my mind, and I think how much I wish a cop was here. Then out of nowhere, a cop pulls up behind us, lights blaring and sirens going, and jumps out. I cannot actually see the officer, just his silhouette as he's standing in front of his own headlights. He says to us in a strong voice, "Go now, we got this." And I look at my husband with a "let's get the hell out of here" look, and we drove off. Moments later, we pull over to call 911 to make sure everything is okay, but they say they have no deputies in that area. So we call state police. No one in that area. So no state police, no county, and no Grand Ronde or Lincoln City police. Who pulled up behind us? And where was that guy walking from? He was so and while being so oblivious to it being freezing out. We have never driven through Van Duzer corridor ever again. I think we have a new filming location between 2 and 3 a.m. Yeah, I've driven that highway. Never at that time of night though. So now I need to go and redo that, but it's a beautiful area, but very heavily wooded. And I could definitely see that there could be, it could be a hotbed for stuff like that to happen. No doubt.
This is like a Week in Strange Greatest Hits, isn't it? Everything is in it, including the time it happened. I find it interesting that there's far more legends of these kind of roads in America than there is in any other country. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like it's a very American thing. The spooky highway, the road you don't go on. It's a very American thing.
My phone just dropped from 37% battery to 13. Just while I was reading that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We're turning into almost like a live ghost hunter show now at this point. Yeah.
And that same thing happened.
The lights got weird again.
Yeah, and that same thing happened earlier with my computer. I was editing yesterday's pub down, or about to edit it down. Yeah, go ahead. And my computer battery, it's this MacBook Pro. It's only a couple years old, and the battery just dropped down completely, and it's still not charged up fully. It gave me the low battery thing when we're here in the middle of Week and Strange, and it's still not charging right. So we've been having, like we talked about yesterday, there's been all kinds of weird battery shit going on, and yeah, we're definitely doing our own little bit of paranormal research here live on the air. But I was going to say about that one that Timoney was just reading. That's also something great that we could do a little short film about. Go out in the middle of the night and do some recording and do a little film about that area, because that's not too far from here. But yeah, that's just so strange with the missing time and everything. We've had our own little missing time encounters here recently, doing things. I'll have Timoney tell the story, but it's just as things get stranger, it's like, missing time becomes a thing, and it's not like drugs or alcohol or anything's involved, but that same kind of thing of like calculating in your mind, something's only going to take, you're watching TV or you're watching a film and you think, okay, this is going to be over by like 2 a.m. And then realizing it's like 4, 5 in the morning. It's like, what, where'd all that time just go? It wasn't, so I've had things like that happening lately, but the
light fixture behind Timoney's head, what kind of light fixture is it? Is it a bulb hanging down on a cable on a wire? It's a
bulb hanging down. There's a little drawstring on it that there might be a little bit of movement coming from that.
Yeah, that's what I wondering. I was seeing a black shadow rocking back and forth. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was a string first.
Yeah. No, it's just but that's just a raw bulb there with a pull cord behind it. When she walked by, the breeze probably moved it. Yeah. But this one's just real interesting, and definitely something that I would really enjoy making a short film about.
Any theories onto why it's mostly America that has these strange roads?
One theory that comes to mind is because there's so many people that, like we've talked about before, that have come here and brought whatever existed with them in their cultures, entity-wise, spirit-wise, folklore, all that kind of stuff. And it just, it wasn't just the melting pot of people. It was the melting pot of all these spiritual, all these different spiritual kingdoms. So I wonder if that has something to do with it.
There was a street when I was a kid near where I lived that I was absolutely terrified of walking past. I used to go to a Boy Scout meeting near there, and there was I literally lived in terror walking past the street. It terrorized me, and I don't know why. I don't know where, but there was it was an alleyway off this street in an old neighborhood, so the houses were all 150 years old kind of thing. I found out later on that I had a great aunt who used to work, and you have to go that way because the bus stop was at the end of that to where we got home. And at night, coming back from the Boy Scouts, I'd go to that bus stop, but I never saw anything or heard anything. But I had an aunt who used to work in a private hospital just around the corner from there. She was a nurse, and she used to have to beg orderlies or other male nurses or doctors from the hospital to walk her to the bus stop because she was terrified of walking past the same lane. And I didn't even know that she had this experience when I told, I think, my father about it. And my father said, you had a nan who used to live in terror of walking down that street at night, coming out of hospital. So there you go. Is it a ley line? Is it a place where something evil happened? But the American, I find it fascinating, the American highway experience of this. It's almost like, is it built on Indian sacred ground or something, and it's been cursed or hexed or something?
Yeah, I was going to say something about that when Timoney was talking about is it such a melting pot of just, but also with culture. And then also too, there being another culture that existed here before when a lot of the West Coast was Mexico. I don't know how, somebody can probably tell in the comments, but most of the cities along the West Coast all had Spanish names from when this used to. There's another little click that came on through a weird EVP on our computer right then. But yeah, with this whole thing though of Mexico having most of California and the West Coast having been Mexico before, that some of these roads, who knows what the histories of them were. And that idea too, that, there was a whole entire group of tribal nations, kind of independent sovereign tribes that lived on this land. And a lot of that history has been totally suppressed too, where it might be part of the oral tradition passed down, but most people aren't initiated into those groups enough to be able to get what that history is, because it's all been so watered down by it being Americanized, where some of those roads and everything have been built over and paved over. And I know that, for instance, down in San Diego on our station, there's Highway 8 that comes off of I-5, and there's the Mission that overlooks that hill there. And there's always just a tremendous amount of car accidents, like fatal car accidents that would occur on that stretch of highway there. It's just like, yep, that road's got to be cursed from something, whether it was from the missionaries coming and throwing people's bodies off of that cliff up there, or if it's just from something that they, like we've talked about before, did the people doing El Camino Real research these points where they were nodes that they built the missions on. And that's still what I think, is that there are nodal points, just like Thomas, you talked about with the megalithic sites, that there's always a space that no matter who it is, the culture will put something there to mark that spot, whether it's with stone or whether it's with, whatever technology of the era is. And it's just something that our current, scientific paradigm doesn't account for.
I think this will make a very good future investigation for us. The road it's not too far from you guys, is it?
Lincoln City is about 6.5 hours from here.
That's a long way.
But it's worth it. I'm used to actually traveling up there once a year anyways. Usually make at least a once a year pilgrimage to the Oregon coast. So it's a drive. I can almost do that drive in my sleep. I've done it so many times. It's not a big deal. We could get there.
Yeah, that might be one worth doing because, and if you did it late at night too as well, like on the witching hour.
Yeah, definitely.
Like stick go at 2 and say drive through 4. I'd be fascinated. It'd be fascinated. I think people would find just to see if anything happened, the EVPs or anything, because there definitely is something to these stories. There's a famous one in New Jersey that goes through the Pine Barrens, and
the Pine Barrens is another weird place.
Well, I nearly bought a house just across from them, and it was a very nice house, and it was for a bargain price. And there was a swamp between the back porch and the end of the Pine Barrens, and I just looked across that swamp.
My sister is building a house. My sister's building a house in New Jersey right now. I'm not sure where she's at in proximity to the Pine Barrens, but
Pine Barrens is huge.
There too.
It almost covers a huge distance between New York and Philadelphia. That's what's remarkable about it.
Then she's got to be near it then.
One of the most densely populated parts of the world. Yep. And you have this spectacular wilderness, but that has a famous road through it. I forget the name. But like even today, people will avoid any way to drive through it at night.
Let's do it. We can get there in about what?
Get there by cycle.
To New Jersey?
No. It's Philadelphia. It's Philadelphia. You get there. No, it's closer to Philadelphia than New York. So yeah, if you can fly into Philadelphia and rent a car, you'd be there that afternoon.
I was talking about getting in the car and driving down to Oregon to this site right now, because if we leave right now, it's 2:30 and get there at sometime around sundown and then drive back.
We'll do a live Zoom or a live Facebook thing from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. while we drive through the corridor.
I love it. I fucking love it. Yes, please.
All right, we're gonna fucking do it then. All right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the new one. Not I fucking love science. I fucking love paranormal, and paranormal is the new normal.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm good. Okay. New York. Feds to release non-toxic particles, gases in New York subway as part of terrorism study. Federal researchers will release non-toxic particles and gases into the New York City subway this month as part of a study on airborne terrorism threats, announced officials on Sunday. Federal researchers will release non-toxic particles and gases into the New York City subway this month as part of a study on blah, blah, blah. Okay. Researchers from the Homeland Security Department and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology aim to find actionable data for emergency preparedness authorities, according to an advisory from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. The particles and gases that will be used in the study are designed to imitate biological and chemical agents, authorities said. The scientists will set up air testing devices at dozens of locations across the subway from October 18th through the 29th to conduct the study. The Homeland Security Department did an environmental assessment of the gases and particles to be released to ensure they're safe. It's not the first time the feds have used the city's subway system as a testing ground for potential airborne attacks. This month's research is part of the Urban Threat Dispersion Project, which in 2016 conducted similar experiments in the subway. But U.S. officials haven't always notified. What is that word? What is that word? Strap hang. Okay, somebody really fucked that up. But U.S. officials haven't always notified passengers they're involved in the tests.
Strap hangers. That's what you call when you ride the subway.
Oh.
Because the old subway cars used to have a strap. They now have a bar. But that's what
okay.
That's like it's
that
like
is what it says. That is what it says. I thought my eyes were bugging out. I'm like feeling really weird.
It's not some S&M thing. No, it's that's what you call yourself if you ride the subway in New York every day. You're a strap hanger.
Okay, I'm feeling a little bit weird. Like I feel a little dizzy and lightheaded. So I can. Okay, all right. Strap hangers.
If you never heard it, you wouldn't know. You know, you wouldn't know those things. Yeah. You wouldn't know.
West Coasters. Fucking West Coasters. Yeah. What? Okay. Sorry. The Army in 1966 sprayed a bacteria officials said was harmless directly onto city subway riders as part of an experiment made public in 1980. The subway riders, accustomed to wild experiences underground, did not notice the test, which Army officials said made the system a prime target for a covert attack. MTA officials promised the latest airborne tests will be much more transparent. Customers may see signage identifying specific locations involved in the study as they travel around New York City, the agency wrote in an advisory. The study poses no health risks to the public using materials they have repeatedly been used in prior outdoor and indoor airflow tests. Wow. I feel like I just completely lost my ability to read and comprehend. Those other ones threw me through here. You'll
start talking and you start talking in Aramaic or Babylonian next.
Right. Yeah. It's going to happen. Like, I think we need to make this drive happen now. No, this is so weird. I saw this one and I just had to include it in here but this whole thing about, with the connection of what we talked about yesterday with that festival where there's some sort of agent introduced through a delivery device, because I'm not going to say that on here, but yeah, something like that. It's like, really, is that, what are they actually releasing on this?
In the 1960s, the CIA released smallpox deliberately on the New York subway system as a test. And Gore Vidal wrote about that in his book, The Fall of the American Empire. And that really did happen. When they tell you this, they're biological attacks. They're not planning for terrorists. They're planning for themselves.
Right. And isn't the definition of terrorism actually government by fear, governance by fear?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But with this being said, where was it? Oh, yeah. Windows Zero just the other day talking about that smallpox thing and all of this. And it's just like, where's this coming from?
That meme that's going around of Columbo is fantastic. Have you seen that meme? That's like the best meme I've seen in years. You know, just one thing, Mr. Gates. No one mentioned smallpox attack until you did.
Well, this is it's just so weird.
Whoever made that meme deserves an award or something.
Meme of the year, maybe one of the best memes of the year. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I would not, if I were a strap hanger, I would be really
strap hanger. I know. Now that you mentioned, it does sound kind of S&M. But they used to be, the old trains used to have leather straps on them. That's why. Ooh. But yeah, I know. I mean, you'd be crucified on them, you know. But now they have a bar, so it's kind of like easier to wipe the body fluids off.
Oh, God. But yeah, if I were a strap hanger, I would be really uncomfortable about this. It just seems really strange that, like, how can people go, oh, okay, I'm getting bombarded with all this stuff, and like it's allegedly harmless, but they said it'll be a lot more transparent about it. I'm like, well, what do they mean by transparent? Is it like can't see it? Right? It's fucking, yeah.
Well, I've seen some very strange things when I lived in New York on the subways, and anyone who's lived in New York, I don't know if it still goes on, but back in those days, I mean, and I saw things that, looking back on them now, may have been kind of some kind of psychological. I taught a performance arts thing. I remember there's a guy came on with a saxophone, and he was dressed like a giant bumblebee, and he claimed to be from another planet. And he was playing the sax and saying, "I have no enemies on this planet except Reagan. If you hate Reagan, join me." And I was wondering, now looking back on that now, I was wondering if that was some kind of weird, MK Ultra kind of thing.
or just going back to the last story we're talking about with roads kind of being haunted or roads being passageways and a great place to do rituals on, because I definitely know I've encountered entities on the the crossroads, exactly. And that I definitely have encountered entities on I think it's the Southern Pacific Rail line there that goes through the central part of the United States, where I have legitimately encountered entities that have taken over people's bodies. And with but the New York subway thing, just one last little caveat here, Thomas, but it goes going underground and going through, going underneath the city, and the whole idea about jinn and everything occupying. And then the electrical part of it too is the last thing I was going to say. So there's the plasma there, the third rail, right? And there's all those tunnels, and some of them are closed down, but they still have those nexus points of crossovers there where you
a very old system. I will tell you something. I don't know I was an entity, but I used to take the Long Island Railroad train, and I used to, about 5:30 in the morning. I used to work in Weehawken, New Jersey, so I used to commute all the way from Bayside, New York to Weehawken, New Jersey, which was a long-ass commute, but totally doable because the transit system in New York is fantastic. But I used to get down to get a 5 a.m. train from Bayside Station, which was not underground, but below street level. And I'd be the only one in that station some mornings. And looking down the train tracks, I used to see orbs of light moving back and forth between the hedgerows on either side of the tracks. I guess it was plasma or something. But there is something spooky about some of these remote train lines and stuff like that, or late at night and stuff like that. There's a fantastic, in fact, tonight, everyone should watch this. There's a fantastic documentary called Ghosts of the London Underground that's on YouTube, and it's one of the best paranormal TV shows ever made. And the London Underground is completely and totally haunted because it goes so deep, and it goes under things like Roman temples and things like that.
I know we've been talking about dreams a lot lately, but there's a dream that I've had 3 times. And each time I've had it, it's almost exactly the same. And I hate to use the thing from Harry Potter, but it really is a good visual if you've seen it. If you know what the Dementors are in that, they're these like, they look like ring wraiths, basically. They're kind of like ring wraiths, and they're more, I don't know. Anyways, they can flow through your body, and every time they pass through your body, they take some of your energy. They steal a part of you. And it's like you get weaker and weaker and weaker every time they pass through you. And so I've had this dream 3 times, and I had these dreams years before I ever actually rode the subway in New York. And in the dream, I'm riding the subway. I don't remember who I was with, or I may have even just been riding it by myself. It's a loaded subway, lots of people on there. And then my dreams shifts from, I always dream in color. The only time I dream in something that's black and white is when an entity specifically shows up. So normal riding the subway, everything's in color. And then it was like the snap of fingers and everything turned black and white. And all of the people turned into like non-playing characters. They went completely void. They were there, but they were just staring straight forward, and no one was talking anymore. And I like became almost paralyzed, but I stood first, and then I was paralyzed. And this thing, whatever the fuck it was, it passed through me. And every time it passed through me, on The Exorcist, where you get that flash of the demon face for just like a split second. Yeah. Every time it passed through me, that it wasn't that specific face, but it was like that, this evil, demonic entity face it would flash before my eyes. And then I would just break down crying and panicking, and just like the saddest feeling I've ever had. Beyond even being sad, it was like utter despair. And it was the darkest I think the darkest feeling I can remember ever feeling, whether awake or in a dream.
Was that Thomas? Did you just say something?
No.
There was a male voice that went like, "Ooh."
Did you hear that?
That was me. That was me.
Okay. We're freaking ourselves out now. But so I don't know if this has anything to do with this story at all, but it's been a while since I thought of that dream. And it was one of those dreams that I've had it 3 times in my life. And every time I wake up from that dream, I wake up crying. I'm crying in my dream, and then I'm crying as I come out of the dream, and then I wake up and I'm sobbing. So
the weeping thing.
Yeah.
The weeping thing from a dream is a very specific type of weeping. It's like a deep soul sadness, isn't it?
Yeah, like I said, that's the lowest, saddest, emptiest I think I've ever felt, whether in a dream or in waking life. I can't think of another time I've ever felt that completely fucking empty.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I know. It's a horrible experience.
Yeah.
You feel like a soul has been scooped out.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to put into words. It's just
and you're almost like weeping for your soul or something.
Yeah. It's dark.
Speaking of train ghost stories, I know a good one here in Ireland. There was a place called Limerick Junction, which used to, well, it still is, where lots of rail lines around the country all converge and interchange. And there used to be, in the old days, dormitories there for the train drivers who worked late at nights. They could sleep there if they wanted. And it was so haunted, the rail company actually demolished it. The train drivers would do anything not to sleep, out of train crews would do anything not to sleep in these dormitories, there was nothing wrong with them. They were very nice and very well looked after and clean and everything. They used to sleep in cattle cars in the winter rather than sleep in a comfortable bed in the train man's dormitories because it was so haunted. And they ended up actually demolishing the building. Now, I went through there. It's also a very bleak and strange place too, as well. And I went through there like 2 years ago, and I saw the remains of that thing. And I remembered an old guy who worked on the trains as a brakeman in the back of the brake vans. You call them cabooses in America. And he said that he saw grown men sleeping on the hay of a cattle wagon, a cattle car, with the cow shit smell still all over it, rather than sleep inside that dormitory in a comfortable bed. He said it was pure evil and terrifying, was so haunted. And that's interesting, isn't it? I think that was like a fairy thing as well, also, because it's in the middle of nowhere, that junction.
Oh, this is fascinating. This makes me want to do a haunted railroad film now. Got all these film ideas.
There's an underground there. We do have an underground railroad 45 minutes from here. They actually, the town is called Pendleton, and I've never taken this tour, but I know lots of people who have. It exists because I can't remember when it was, but they were, there was a bunch of Chinese immigrants that they were,
that's the other one.
Yeah, that they were transporting through there. And so it's not only an underground railroad, it's a whole underground city where they set up their shops. And yeah, we could go fucking take a tour.
Yeah. That's the other thing. I remember we were talking about roads, and that just reminded me what Timoney said about the Chinese being here. That, yeah, I mean, that's the other big part of why I think some of the there could be haunted roads and stuff too, because you had people coming over here. I want to say around the same time the Dutch were coming to this continent. You had the Chinese coming to this continent too. I want to say in the Bay Area. My dad knows the story really well about them finding these ships that were sunk into the bottom of the San Francisco Bay, that they were dated like before the Bay Area was San Francisco, before it was.
And they had stone ball anchors. Yeah, that's a Chinese ship and a Chinese anchor. Yeah.
And those were long fucking time ago, but that's just that whole thing reminded me when Timoney said that. And then if they were here in the somewhere near the Columbia River, right? Yeah. So this is an interesting thing to look into here. But as we were talking about yesterday, and as you talked about in last week's Psychic Weather, it's a tremendous time for creativity right now. And I've got all these ideas I'm charged up for now to want to go and make some of these films. And
So if anybody does anything bad to you right now, just ignore it and create instead.
Right.
Good time for songwriters and poets.
Yep. And filmmakers. Yeah. All right. Yeah. We're going to check that out.
Okay. I'm still feeling really kind of weird and off. I'm going to go down by the river, I think, and take a walk. I've got this really strange, strong stabbing feeling in my back right now too, which is, I didn't think about that until I just said it out loud. Yeah, I don't know. That started happening when I was reading that one story of the guy and his dad. So yeah, I think this is a good place to thank all of you for being here. This was a really, this one. Huh?
It's 3-6. Is this? This is our episode. Oh, wait, never mind. What's 6 times 3? Is that 18?
I don't know. I forget.
Yeah. So this one's number 666 for us. We've got episode 18 of The Week in Strange is episode 666. So this is our good one right here. So a little bit of the great beast, Aleister Crowley. And you're right. No, but.
Did you guys hear that?
So
that was me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, speaking of strange gas, I need to go pass some gas a little bit and get out of here. So,
yeah,
trying to keep it light.
Yeah,
Banish with laughter.
Great show tonight, guys. By the way, I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you. You too. The psychic weather was good, and yeah. Now
you got me thinking now about like ghosty train stories. I'm thinking about there's a fantastic BBC documentary, Denham Elliott, not political documentary. A portrayal of a Charles Dickens story called The Signal Man, and it's about a ghost story at an English train line. It's absolutely terrifying. If you can see it, if you can find that online, check it out. The Signal Man with that Denham Elliott.
Okay, we'll do. We'll look for it. All right, and then what was the other one that you mentioned? The London Underground Railway.
That's a factual one. The Ghost of the London Underground. That's definitely on YouTube. It's beautifully made. It's actually you'll see when you see it how it's inspired my kind of filmmaking, because it tells the stuff non-sensationalist. It's not that's why I love when it's not done sensationally.
I saved it to my watch later.
Unfortunately, a lot of American shows, they're like, ghost, all this kind of thing, man,
Yeah,
who's that guy? That American guy who goes around the world.
Zach Baggins.
Yeah, he was at the cave in the Morrigan, and he was getting, is it a demon? Is it a demon? The demon down here. I was like, wait, I hope you fucking fall down it.
I hate that fucker.
Anyway.
All right.
Slán leat, arrivederci, ciao, bon diem, auf Wiedersehen.
Laters.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.